Thanks for being willing to talk with us, Oscar. If you want to briefly introduce yourself and then let us know anything you want about the work that's happening that you're engaged in at the Quaker Voluntary Service, or anything else you want to share.
Cool. So my name is Oscar Castro. I live in Philadelphia. I'm a member of Central Philadelphia Monthly Meeting. Been a Quaker since 2011, I think. And my time with Friends has been longer than that. I used to work for the American Friends Service Committee starting in 2002, and I spent almost 10 years there doing anti-militarism work mostly, and focused on youth. And so I've been here and there. I've been, I guess, in the nonprofit world since exiting college for the most part. And that's my background in regards to who I am, I should say. As it relates to racial justice, equity, the work that I'm doing at QVS right now, which is where I'm at and have been since 2017, has been evolving. I think most people who know Quaker Voluntary Service, which is a 10-year-old organization, give or take a year, knows that it works with young people, young adults who are seeking opportunities to give of themselves in terms of service in nonprofits throughout the country. We're in 5 different cities. And as an adult-focused organization, one would think, in a social justice organization at that, one would think that we would have this equity, this racial justice thing, all of that down pat because of the nature of the demographics of the folk that we're working with. And to be honest, that wasn't necessarily the case. So a few years ago, when I was also the coordinator, I'm the coordinator for the Philadelphia program here in Philly. Our then founder and executive director and I got to talking about the kind of equity work that we could be doing in QVS that we were kind of doing, but weren't really focused on doing as a concerted effort. So as intersectional as equity and racial justice may seem to be, without a centered focus on it, it meant that there were things that we probably were making mistakes on, things that we weren't doing that we should be doing, being able to address how we as an organization show up for our fellows of all persuasions and complexions, but particularly the Black and Brown fellows that were showing up. We recognize that the Religious Society of Friends, at least in North America, is historically and predominantly white. And so as it related to being welcoming of young adults who aren't necessarily white, let alone friends, how are we working with the local meetings that are our sponsors, if you will, that hold care of our program within their meetings, and how do we support them in meeting the fellows, these young adults, where they're at, where they're coming into our organization as social justice minded people. And I think one of the triggers, if you will, was recognizing that around the country, in each of the cities that we have been operating in, there was always, at any given year, always going to be some challenge, and particularly among friends, because we're working with friends in the sense that their meetings are holding our work in the light. And while friends have a history of social justice, doing things like promoting abolition, right to vote, etc. We also know that Friends, Quakers, Religious Society of Friends has had a challenging history too. And so being a Quaker doesn't necessarily mean that somebody is definitely an anti-racist, is promoting anti-racism, is aware of their implicit biases, etc. I think we would like to think that Friends, out of maybe all the religious denominations and organizations that exist, that Friends, because of the social justice history, would get it. But we were finding that there are a lot of Friends who don't get it. Things like pronouns, things like how not to say the O word in relationship to Asian people, how not to say the N word, even if it's just in a context of explaining something, like the the that were being crossed by well-meaning, well-intentioned Quakers and harming our young adults who were not really sure how to deal with this. I thought you were a Quaker. Why did that come out of your mouth? Or why did I experience this harm? So as we got to analyze this reality, we thought, okay, well, we really need to do an assessment of our organization. And that's kind of where we started. What do we need to do internally that helps us better understand what we don't know about the nature of our organization and the work that needs to be done? There's so much that we could do, but rather than just throwing darts at a dartboard and saying, oh, let's do that, let's do that, let's do that, we did a very comprehensive assessment with staff and with our board members. And from that, it allowed us to begin to focus on the things that we wanted to do that made sense for achieving a sensibility around racial equity in QBS. You know, some of the things that we've been doing as a result of that have been recognizing that, for example, we have fellows who are African descendant and come into this organization. We ask everybody to live simply. We give them a very small stipend to figure out how to live on. Most of the time, like the food stipend that we give them is a collective endeavor of how we shop and how we buy food. But the personal stipend that we give them is for them, you know, to buy toiletries and things like that. And we started to notice things like African-American women, for example, who are in the workplace, generally, because the normative way of approaching professional workspaces is you have to clean cut, or you have to be presentable. And while we as an organization never really wanted to convey that kind of a narrative, we were also very aware that our, particularly women who were African descendant, were being held to an expectation, if you will, at least in their organizations or in the general society, that didn't kind of reconcile with the small stipend that we were giving them to take care of themselves. So black hair being a thing that can be expensive to take care of, however you want to do that, whether you are perming your hair, whether you're dreadlocking your hair, whether you're braiding your hair up, it's not a cheap endeavor. And we got to thinking about the equity or the lack of equity around that. If we're giving everybody the same amount of money to do the same things, but some people need more because of the texture of their hair, how are we working with that? So we created a Black Hair Fund that allows men and women, anyone with African descended hair, I should say, who feels like they need more than what their stipend is giving them to take care of their hair, an opportunity to get the money that they could need, they can have to then go to the salon or whatever it is that they would need to do to get their hair done. And that was, you know, for us, it just seemed like a no-brainer. But as we began talking about our organization, we're like, what? We would have never thought of that. Oh my God, that's so amazing. And you know, I think in retrospect, we didn't think about it until we thought about it too. But part of that was our awareness, like you know, the assessment that we did, and it's kind of an ongoing thing because you know we did an assessment, but we haven't concluded that is everything. We have turnover in our organization. We have new local support committee members in each city that come into the organization to support the fellows and the coordinators in those cities. So there's going to constantly be a need to make sure that we are paying attention to how people are showing up, how we're showing up as an organization in the lives of our young adults, but as well as the Quaker meetings that are supporting us. And I feel like a lot of what we are doing now is in relationship to, well, we have done a few things initiative-wise to allow for a greater sense of equity, and particularly racial equity within our organization. As it relates to fellows specifically, we're now pivoting to dealing with our local support committee members and holding dialogues that allow them to unpack some of the things that I mentioned beforehand, that are things that show up from time to time in any given year, in any given city, that are avoidable things, but things that friends might not necessarily know to avoid or to be aware of with regards to themselves and racial justice and racial equity. I would say, like, a case in point would be that one of the workshops that I've done had somebody use the O word in relationship to particularly Asian Americans. And while I know that there are definitely Asian people who don't really have a problem with that word, there are a lot of other people who do. And it's it's a term that has been used to identify a large swath of people from all parts of Asia, but not necessarily one that was adopted by those people necessarily back then. And we had a friend who was using that term in the workshop. So to be able to step back and say, these are one of the things that that can happen. You're a great person. You're an awesome person. You show up in all these variety of ways that are really helpful, and you probably don't know it. But if an Asian American were in the room and heard you say that term, despite all of the other things that might make you be perceived as a great person, that is going to be the thing that might have somebody say, I'm not sure about these Quakers, or I'm not sure about that Quaker, or I'm not sure about that Quaker meeting, or I'm not sure about this program. And so we know that we're not going to be, I as the person who's kind of fundamentally responsible for this, we're not going to fill all the cracks. That's a reality. But I think my goal is to make sure that we know that the cracks exist. And yeah, and I guess to work off of that thread, we've had fellows have experiences within Quaker meetings where vocal ministry was happening, and something coming out of a person's mouth, while they might feel they were led by the Spirit, and that is debatable and arguable, landed some was Spirit, and then was said was very problematic. So we have chosen to focus on our local support committees as a fulcrum, I guess, because they hold the space in a lot of ways for how our young adults who are joining QVS view Quakers if they haven't had an experience with Quakers before. And I would say that a good percentage of fellows in any given year in my city will be mostly non-Quakers, and I might have a couple Quakers, I might have no Quakers, and so we as an organization definitely want to be supportive, I would say, of while we know friends don't proselytize, but we want to shine. I think we want people to see us in a light that we prefer to be seen. And if we're not working closely with the people who are representative of their meetings and the larger religious society of friends by virtue of them being Quakers, then it can leave very salty taste in the mouths of young adults who are not Quakers and might be thinking this is a good spiritual practice or a good spiritual community, and then something like this happens where they're questioning how honest and how authentic we are as it relates to social justice. And of course, knowing that we're never going to, I'm not ever going to reach all of the friends in the North America continent. It's sort of like the starfish story, where the young person is on the beach in the morning very early throwing starfish into the ocean as a older person walks by and sees all the thousands of starfish on the beach. Why are you doing this? You're never going to get them all. What does it matter? And of course it matters to that one. It matters to that one every time you throw one back into the ocean. So it's kind of like that. We're not going to help everyone, but as we can read, that is the purpose. Both our fellows' standpoint, I mean, that's kind of the purpose of our program, to help them grow in so many ways. But what we're realizing is that a lot of our older friends who are supportive of our program need help too. And while we're not necessarily taking responsibility for any one monthly meeting that is a supporter of ours, we're working closely with our local support committees, who are essentially the avatars, the representatives from those meetings. And what they're learning through their experience as support, as they unpack it, discuss their support, discuss the experiences that they have, both with us as staff and the fellows that they're experiencing. So my hope is that like this next arc that we're in, working with local support committees all around the country, will allow us again to permeate into the broader Quaker communities in other cities, maybe around the world. With our, an organization like ours can only but do that to start with, and then see where it goes.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a powerful impact that Quaker Voluntary Service is having on the Religious Society of Friends, that I'm not sure a lot of people realize that the work is happening in really key places across the country because of how QVS's commitments to social justice and anti-racism is impacting the local meeting support, which then has an impact on the communities that those members are part of. So that's exciting, and that means that over the long haul, we could really make a difference. That's really cool.
Yeah, our dialogues have been going really well. I would say, COVID-19 did a thing on us. The goal was to go to each city and do these local dialogues with our local support committee members, but travel wasn't going to be possible to do that. And I mean, even here locally in Philly, getting a gathering of folks was not going to be prudent. So adjusting to the virtual Zoom sort of way of doing this has been the thing. And in a lot of ways, while it's tough to not be in person with people and be in the very same room with them, it also has allowed us to have a broader approach to this, because now I'm cross-pollinating and cross-seeding with local support committee members, Quakers from all around the country in the different cities that we operate in, rather than just a cohort of Atlanta local support committee members or a cohort of Boston local support committee members. So this allowed us, for what it's worth, to have voices sharing about their experiences in each of the different cities. Our next step, once we're done the last series of dialogues, which will be in August, will be to then do a more deeper dive with each of the local support committees in the city. We're doing some broad brush stroke stuff with the dialogues that we're doing now. We're getting into the weeds a little bit, but it's because of the intersectionality as it relates to the different support committee members from the different cities, and the local communities there. So that'll be sometime in the fall. We'll be starting very more focused dialogues with each local support committees in each of the cities that we operate in, so that we can be unpacking their specific challenges and the history of things that may have happened, things they would like to see happen in their own city, and to begin to drill down so they are able to do the work at a local level and support the coordinator, fundamentally support themselves in moving through these conversations and having a deeper understanding of why we do this work, why pronouns are important, for example. Not a lot of our older friends, in my experience, have turned that corner and gotten it yet. But because we keep having these conversations, they're getting it. And so I think, the dialogues are important. It's the only way we're really ever going to be able to move through the challenges that we have. If we don't talk about them, if we don't express our challenges and our concerns, and if we don't think about, the tactical approaches to fixing them, what do we need to do? then of course we're never going to get there. We're going to be spinning our wheels, and at least as it relates to our experiences with our young adults who are coming into our program, some who have been, I would say, some very harmed in a variety of ways. How we can mitigate that, how we can make this as safe and as brave a space for them as possible, knowing that we can't make it an absolutely safe space, and there are so many things that we just can't control. But the things that we can control, how do we control them in a way that is fluid, and how do we make room for learning and growth from here on out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess I could say a little more about. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
After you. I was just gonna say I could say a little bit more about my own personal journey.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm Puerto Rican, for what that's worth. I identify in a variety of ways: Boricua, Afro-Taino, sometimes just Taino, Latinx, Puerto Rican, and as a lighter skinned Puerto Rican, I definitely understand my light skin privilege. As a Puerto Rican who doesn't have a discernible Spanish accent, I recognize that privilege. As a male presenting person, I recognize my privilege in that regard. And my journey has been one of making clear identifications with who I am over time, and learning about myself as well, like trying to figure out gender, trying to figure out race and ethnicity, all of the things that are me. I'm a deep thinker, and so I would say for all of my life I've been having these thoughts about who am I, why am I, and how do I fit. And being Puerto Rican, and particularly I guess a lighter skinned Puerto Rican who grew up in an African American suburb in South Jersey and went to predominantly white schools, like I have this really interesting cultural blend. I can say, I think with all degrees of accuracy, that I feel very tricultural, and yet I'm not an African American, and yet I'm not a white American. And so, the reason why I believe I do this work, and even before I was doing it in the professional context, doing it as an activist, is because I see the challenges that this socially constructed thing called race presents to our society. When I had the opportunity to do this work for QVS, it was really exciting to me because I could see the need, both at our organizational level, and internally, as we're showing up away at all times, if not at most times, but also for the broader religious society of friends, which as I've been tracking over the years, I remember coming across Vanessa July's seminal work and thinking, this was history I didn't know about Quakers, as related to their abolitionist movement, and at the same time, still not necessarily embracing Black people and African descended people in a way that you would think if they were abolitionists, they would have. So I have had a journey of discovery along the way, personal journey, I would say professional journey, in this context, a spiritual journey as it relates to what it means to be a person of color who is also a Quaker, and how that fits for somebody like me, recognizing that the majority of Quakers in this continent are not people like me, and don't have a background like me. So how do I fit? Do I fit? And so my coming into this work really is a result of me asking those questions ever since I can remember asking those questions. I off and on, I've been working on this memoir, I guess, called Black, White, and Me, which, if I can ever get it finished, would speak to the dichotomy, if you will, of the racial divide. It's a Black and or white thing, but there are a lot of us who are trapped in the middle. And where do we fit? And how do we fit? So this work is important to me primarily because, you know, at a personal level, I've been exploring and journeying, but also at a broader level, I really want to have as much of an impact as I can on helping people understand the challenges, their own personal challenges that may relate to isms and things that they don't recognize are there. So I feel like I'm a flashlight that gets turned on every so often so that people can see what they need to see within themselves.
Mm, mhm, mm. That's so powerful. Thank you for sharing about both about the Quaker voluntary service work, which I feel like is deeply important and exciting, and about your own journey. Um, I think you are a valued leader and elder in our community. And so I really appreciate you, your willingness to talk for a bit today.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My pleasure. Anytime.